In the shadows of 1895 London, a single envelope arrives at 221B Baker Street, its cryptic note pulling Sherlock Holmes into a deadly game. A man accused of murder, a forged alibi mailed through the city's heart, and a mysterious friend. Who knows too much? Is Edward Grayson a killer or a pawn? As Holmes unravels a web of blackmail and betrayal, a shocking twist reveals the mastermind, a man presumed dead, hiding in plain sight. But with every clue, a darker shadow looms. Who is pulling the strings? And will Holmes catch them before the noose tightens? Chapter 1. A Curious Envelope. The waning days of October 1895. The familiar sitting room at 221B Baker Street bore the quiet air of anticipation that so often preceded one of Sherlock Holmes's remarkable adventures. The fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the cluttered room, where chemical apparatus jostled for space with stacks of newspapers and the detritus of Holmes's eclectic pursuits. I, Dr. John H. Watson, sat in my accustomed armchair, a medical journal open upon my knee, though my attention was drawn less to its pages than to my friend, who lounged opposite me, his lean frame draped in a dressing gown of faded purple silk. His eyes half closed, gleamed with that peculiar intensity which betokened a mind at work, even as his long fingers toyed idly with the stem of his pipe, from which tendrils of pungent shag tobacco curled into the air. The autumn morning was crisp, and a faint mist clung to the windows, diffusing the pale light of Baker Street beyond. Our breakfast lay untouched upon the table, for Holmes had been in one of his abstracted moods since dawn, his thoughts evidently turned inward upon some problem known only to himself. I had learned, in our years of companionship, to leave him to these reveries, for to interrupt was to invite a sharp rebuke, or worse, a cryptic remark that left one feeling rather foolish. Yet, as the clock upon the mantel struck 10, I could not resist a glance at the untouched tea and toast, and I ventured a remark upon the weather, hoping to draw him from his silence. "A fine morning, Holmes," I said, gesturing toward the window, "though this fog promises a dreary day." Holmes's lips twitched, but he did not stir. "The fog, Watson, is a great leveler," he murmured, his voice low and thoughtful. "It cloaks the beggar and the baron alike, rendering all men equal in its embrace. A fitting metaphor, perhaps, for the mysteries we pursue." I was about to reply when a sharp rap at the door announced the arrival of Mrs. Hudson, our long-suffering landlady. She entered, bearing a silver tray upon which rested a single envelope, its pristine whiteness a stark contrast to the worn surface. "Beneath, a letter for you, Mr. Holmes," she said, placing the tray upon the table with a slight frown. "Delivered by the morning post." The boy seemed in a dreadful hurry. Holmes's eyes snapped open, and he reached for the envelope, with a languid grace that belied the sudden alertness in his manner. He turned it over in his hands, his fingers tracing the edges with the precision of a surgeon. "Singular," he said, his voice tinged with that familiar note of excitement. "No return address, yet the postmark is from Charing Cross. The paper is of fine quality. Note the watermark, Watson. A subtle crown and anchor design, but the handwriting is hurried, almost frantic. What do you make of it?" I leaned forward, peering at the envelope. The address was written in a bold, uneven scrawl, the ink slightly smudged, as though applied with a trembling hand. The seal bore no crest or distinguishing mark, only a plain blob of red wax. "It seems ordinary enough," I ventured, "save for the haste in the writing. Perhaps the sender was pressed for time." Holmes's lips curved into a faint, sardonic smile. Ordinary, my dear Watson, nothing is ordinary. Until proven so, the absence of a return address is deliberate, not careless. The choice of Charing Cross suggests proximity to the heart of London's commerce and intrigue, yet the lack of a crest implies a desire for anonymity. This is no casual missive, but a calculated overture. With a flick of his penknife, he slit the envelope and extracted a single sheet of paper, his eyes scanning the contents with rapid intensity. A low chuckle escaped him, and he leaned back, his expression one of keen amusement. Most intriguing. Listen to this, Watson. He read aloud, his voice clear and precise. Mr. Holmes, I implore your assistance. A man's life hangs in the balance, and I alone hold the key to his salvation. Meet me at the Crown and Anchor, Whitechapel, at 9 o'clock this evening. Come alone, a friend. I frowned, setting aside my journal. A friend, I echoed. Rather vague, is it not? And Whitechapel, of all places, hardly a salubrious locale for a rendezvous. Precisely, said Holmes, springing to his feet with a sudden energy that transformed him from languor to action. Vague, yet calculated. The writer seeks to pique my curiosity while revealing nothing of himself. The mention of a life in peril is a lure as old as human desperation, and the choice of Whitechapel suggests either a man driven to the margins of society or one who wishes to be seen as such. We shall see which. Come, Watson, the game is afoot. I hesitated, glancing at the clock. But Holmes, you are to meet him alone. Surely you do not intend— Tut, tut, Watson, he interrupted, his eyes twinkling with mischief. I shall go alone to the Crown and Anchor, but I shall not be without my trusted chronicler. You will accompany me to Whitechapel, but remain at a discreet distance. Your presence, though unseen, is indispensable. I could not help but smile at his confidence, though a twinge of unease stirred within me. Whitechapel was a district of ill repute, its narrow alleys and shadowed doorways a haven for vice and villainy. Yet the prospect of an adventure with Holmes was a tonic to my spirits, and I rose to prepare for the evening's undertaking. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Holmes dispatched a series of telegrams, his pen scratching furiously as he summoned information from his vast network of informants. Those unseen allies who ranged from street urchins to clerks in government offices. I busied myself with my medical bag, ensuring it was stocked with bandages and restoratives, for I had learned that Holmes's cases often brought us into contact with danger. As the afternoon waned, Holmes retired to his bedroom, emerging an hour later in a rough tweed coat and a slouch hat, his appearance transformed to blend with the denizens of Whitechapel's less savoury quarters. Observe, Watson, he said, turning before me with a theatrical flourish. The gentleman of Baker Street becomes the labourer of the East End. A change of garb is as effective as a change of identity. I nodded, impressed as always by his chameleon-like ability to adapt. And I asked, glancing at my own attire. Sober suit befitting a medical man. You, Watson, shall remain yourself, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. A doctor is a welcome sight in any quarter, and your presence will arouse no suspicion. But keep your revolver at hand. We may have need of it. The fog had thickened by the time we set out, its yellow tendrils curling about the gaslights like spectral fingers. We took a hansom to the edge of Whitechapel, where the streets grew narrower and the air heavier with the mingled scents of coal smoke, stale beer, and unwashed humanity. The Crown and Anchor stood at the corner of a dingy lane, its signs swinging. creakily in the damp breeze. The windows glowed with a sullen light, and the hum of voices within suggested a lively, if not entirely respectable, clientele. Holmes paused at the threshold, his keen eyes scanning the street. "Enter 5 minutes after me, Watson," he said softly. "Take a table near the door and observe. If I signal, be ready to act." I nodded, my heart quickening as he slipped inside. I lingered in the fog, counting the minutes, my hand resting lightly on the revolver in my pocket. At precisely 5 minutes, I pushed open the door and stepped into the smoky interior of the Crown and Anchor. The public house was a riot of sound and motion, its air thick with the clamour of voices and the clink of glasses. Dock workers, costermongers, and the occasional flashily dressed gentleman crowded the bar, their faces flushed with drink or defiance. I took a seat at a small table near the entrance, ordering a pint of ale to maintain my cover. My eyes sought Holmes, and I found him at a corner table, his back to the wall, his posture relaxed, but his gaze alert. At precisely 9 o'clock, the door swung open, and a figure entered, a man of middle height, his face obscured by a muffler and a low-brimmed hat. His movements were nervous, his head darting as he scanned the room. He approached the bar, slipping a note to the barkeep before retreating into the shadows. Holmes's eyes followed him, and I saw his hand tighten briefly. On his glass a signal of interest, I sipped my ale, my senses sharpened by the tension of the moment. Holmes rose, gliding toward the bar with the stealth of a panther. He exchanged a few words with the barkeep, who handed him the note, and then returned to his table, his expression inscrutable. Moments later, he signaled for me to join him, and I crossed the room, my heart pounding. "The man has gone," Holmes said, his voice low, slipped out through a side door before I could intercept him. "But he left this." He unfolded a scrap of paper, his eyes narrowing as he read. "The alibi is in the post. Find it before it is too late. A friend." I frowned, puzzled. "Another riddle. What does it mean?" Holmes folded the note and tucked it into his pocket. "It means, Watson, that our mysterious friend has set us a puzzle, one that involves the postal service and a matter of life and death. The Crown and Anchor was merely a stage for his opening act. We must return to Baker Street at once. I have inquiries to make." We left the public house and stepped into the fog-shrouded street, where the gaslights cast pools of feeble light. As we hailed a hansom, I could not shake the sense that we had embarked upon a case unlike any other, a case where the clues were as elusive as the fog itself, and the stakes, as Holmes had said, were nothing less than a man's life. Back at Baker Street, Holmes shed his disguise and resumed his dressing gown, his movements brisk and purposeful. He lit a fresh pipe and began pacing before the fire, his mind clearly racing. "The note is the key, Watson," he said, pausing to tap the ash from his pipe. "The reference to the alibi suggests a legal matter, likely a criminal case. The postal service is a curious medium for such a clue, reliable, yet slow and easily intercepted. Our friend is either a master of misdirection or a man in desperate straits." I settled into my chair, my notebook open to record the details of this strange affair. "But why contact you in such a manner?" I asked. "Why not come to Baker Street directly?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Fear, Watson. Fear of exposure, or fear of pursuit. The anonymity of the post allows him to act without revealing himself, but he underestimates me. I shall trace this letter to its source, and with it, the man who wrote it." He crossed to his desk and began scribbling telegrams, his pen flying. Across the paper, I have contacts at the Charing Cross post office, he said. A clerk there owes me a favour, and I shall have him examine the records of yesterday's post. In the meantime, Watson, I suggest you rest. Tomorrow promises to be a day of revelations. I retired to my room, but sleep eluded me. The cryptic note, the shadowy figure in the muffler. The grim atmosphere of Whitechapel swirled in my mind, a tangle of questions without answers. I knew that Holmes, with his unparalleled intellect, would unravel the mystery, but I could not help but wonder what dangers lay ahead. The next morning, I awoke to find Holmes already at his desk, surrounded by a litter of papers and telegrams. His eyes were bright with excitement, and he held up a reply from his post office contact. "Progress, Watson," he exclaimed. "A package was posted yesterday from Charing Cross, addressed to a Mr. Edward Grayson, care of a boarding house. In Stepney, the sender's identity is unknown, but the package was marked as urgent. Grayson, it seems, is a man of some notoriety, a gambler and suspected blackmailer, recently arrested for the murder of a wealthy merchant, Sir Henry Balfour." I started, the name stirring a vague memory. Balfour, was he not found dead in his study last month? "Precisely," said Holmes. "Stabbed through the heart, his safe rifled. Grayson was seen leaving the house that night, and his arrest followed swiftly. His only defense is an alibi he claims to have, but cannot produce. This package, I wager, is the alibi our friend referred to." I shook my head, marveling at the intricacy of the affair. "But why send it to you? Why not to Grayson's solicitor?" Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "That, Watson, is the heart of the puzzle. Our friend is not acting out of altruism. He is playing a deeper game, one that involves Grayson, Balfour, and perhaps others yet unknown. We must visit Stepney at once to intercept this package." As we prepared to depart, a second telegram arrived, its contents brief but ominous. Holmes read it aloud. "The alibi is not what it seems. Trust no one." I felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. "Another warning," I said. "This affair grows murkier by the hour." Holmes nodded, his expression grim. "Someone is watching us, Watson, someone who knows our movements and fears our interference. But they shall not deter us. Come, the boarding house awaits." We set out for Stepney, the fog still clinging to the streets, and I could not shake the sense that we were stepping into a web of intrigue, spun by a hand as cunning as it was ruthless. The man who mailed his own alibi had set a trap, and Sherlock Holmes, with his unerring instinct, was determined to spring it. The journey to Stepney was a silent one, each of us lost in thought. The boarding house, when we reached it, was a dilapidated structure, its paint peeling and its windows grimy with neglect. The landlady, a stout woman with a suspicious eye, confirmed that Grayson had resided there until his arrest 3 days prior. No package had yet arrived, but she promised to notify Holmes should it appear as we stepped into the street. A boy darted past, thrusting a crumpled note into Holmes's hand before vanishing into the crowd. Holmes unfolded it, his brow furrowing. "Beware the post. The truth lies elsewhere." "Another riddle," I said, exasperated. "Who is this friend, and what does he want?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. "He wants us to dance, Watson, to follow his clues, and stumble in the dark. But I am no puppet. We shall return to Baker Street and await the package's arrival. In the meantime, I have other inquiries to pursue." Back at our lodgings, Holmes plunged into a frenzy of activity, dispatching more telegrams and consulting his vast index of criminal records. I watched him work, marveling at the relentless energy that drove him. The case of the man who mailed his own alibi had only begun, yet already it promised to be one of the most perplexing of our adventures. As the fire burned low and the fog thickened beyond the windows, I knew that the days ahead would test even Holmes's formidable powers, and that I, his faithful companion, would stand by his side, come what may. Chapter 2. The Shadow in Whitechapel, the Fog That Cloaked. London on that October evening of 1895 was as dense as any I had ever seen. A thick, yellow miasma that seemed to swallow the very light of the gas lamps along the cobbled streets of Whitechapel. Sherlock Holmes and I stepped from our hansom at the edge of that notorious district, where the air carried the mingled scents of coal dust, cheap gin, and the faint, acrid tints of despair. The journey from Baker Street had been swift, yet the transition from the relative order of our lodgings to the chaotic pulse of the East End was jarring, even to a man accustomed to Holmes's penchant for plunging into the city's underbelly. Holmes, clad in a rough tweed coat and a slouch hat that rendered him indistinguishable from the labourers who thronged the streets, moved with a purposeful stride, his keen eyes scanning every shadow. I followed at a discreet distance, as he had instructed, my own attire a sober suit and overcoat marking me as a respectable physician, unlikely to draw undue attention. My hand rested lightly on the revolver in my pocket, a precaution born of experience, for Whitechapel's alleys were no place. For the unwary, the Crown and Anchor, our destination, stood at the corner of a narrow lane, its weathered sign creaking in the damp breeze. The glow from its grimy windows cast a sullen light upon the pavement, and the raucous hum of voices within suggested a clientele drawn from the rougher strata of society. Holmes paused at the threshold, his silhouette sharp against the fog, and turned to me with a glance that conveyed both caution and confidence. 5 minutes, Watson, he murmured. Take a table near the door, and keep your eyes open. If I signal, be ready. I nodded, my pulse quickening as he slipped inside, the door swinging shut behind him. I lingered in the fog, counting the seconds, my senses attuned to the sounds of the street, the clatter of a cart, the distant cry of a hawker, the soft shuffle of footsteps fading into the mist. At precisely 5 minutes, I pushed open the door and entered the Crown and Anchor. Stepping into a world of smoke and noise, the interior was a study in controlled chaos. The air was thick with the reek of tobacco and the sour temps of spilled ale, and the low ceiling seemed to press down upon the crowd of dockworkers, costermongers, and ne'er-do-wells who filled the room. Their voices mingled in a cacophony of laughter, argument, and coarse jests, punctuated by the clink of glasses and the occasional scrape of a chair. I took a seat at a small, scarred table near the entrance, ordering a pint of ale from a harried barmaid to maintain my guise. My eyes sought Holmes, and I found him in a shadowed corner, his back to the wall, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his gaze as sharp as a hawk's. He sat with a glass of whiskey before him, untouched, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. A habit I knew signaled impatience or anticipation. I sipped my ale, my attention divided between Holmes and the room, alert for any sign of our mysterious friend. The clock above the bar, its face yellowed by years of smoke, ticked toward 9, and a hush seemed to settle over me, if not the room, as the appointed hour approached. At precisely 9 o'clock, the door creaked open, and a figure entered. A man of middle height, his face obscured by a muffler wound tightly about his lower jaw, and a low-brimmed hat pulled down over his eyes. His movements were nervous, almost furtive, as he scanned the room, his shoulders hunched as though expecting pursuit. He made his way to the bar, weaving through the crowd with a practiced ease that suggested familiarity with such places. There, he leaned close to the barkeep, a burly man with a scarred face and a suspicious squint hand, slipped a folded note into his hand, accompanied by a few whispered words. The barkeep nodded, tucking the note beneath the counter, and the man retreated, slipping out through a side door into the fog. Holmes's eyes followed him, and I saw his hand tighten briefly on his glass as signal of interest. I remained seated, my heart pounding, as he rose and glided toward the bar with the stealth of a panther stalking its prey. He exchanged a few words with the barkeep, his manner casual but his eyes intent, and the man handed him the note with a grudging nod. Holmes returned to his table, his expression inscrutable, and after a moment, he signaled for me to join him. I crossed the room, weaving through the crowd, and slid into the chair opposite him. "What happened?" I whispered, glancing toward the side door. "Did you see him?" Holmes shook his head, unfolding the note with a deft movement. "He was too quick, Watson. Slipped out before I could intercept him. But he left this, addressed to me." His eyes narrowed as he read, and he passed the scrap of paper to me, in the same hurried scrawl as the letter from Charing Cross. It read, "The alibi is in the post. Find it before it is too late." "A friend," I frowned, the words stirring a sense of unease. "Another riddle," I said, handing the note back. "What does it mean, Holmes? An alibi in the post? It's absurd." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile, but his eyes were grave. "Absurd, perhaps, but deliberate. Our friend is orchestrating a game, Watson won with high stakes. The reference to an alibi suggests a legal matter, likely a criminal case, and the mention of the post implies a piece of evidence sent through the mails. The urgency, before it is too late, points to a deadline, perhaps a trial or an execution. We must return to Baker Street at once. I have inquiries to make." I glanced around the crowded room, half expecting to see the muffled figure lurking in the shadows. But the throng of patrons offered no clues. "Do you think he was watching us?" I asked, lowering my voice. Holmes's gaze flickered to the door. "Undoubtedly. He chose this place for a reason. Its chaos provides cover, and its proximity to the side door ensured his escape. But he has made his first mistake. He has left a trail, however faint. Come, Watson, we have no time to lose." We left the Crown and Anchor, stepping into the fog-shrouded street, where the gaslights cast feeble pools of light. The air was colder now, and the mist seemed to press closer, muffling the sounds of the city. We hailed a hansom, and as we rattled back toward Baker Street, I could not shake the sense that we had brushed against something sinister, a mind as cunning as Holmes's own, weaving a web of deception in the heart of London's underworld. Back at our lodgings, Holmes shed his disguise with the ease of a man discarding a mask, resuming his dressing gown and lighting a fresh pipe. The sitting room, with its familiar clutter, felt like a sanctuary after the grim atmosphere of Whitechapel. But Holmes's restless energy filled the space with a palpable tension. He paced before the fire, the note from the Crown and Anchor, held aloft in one hand, his pipe trailing smoke in his wake. "The post," he said, half to himself, "a curious medium for a clue. The postal service is reliable, yet vulnerable letters can be intercepted, packages lost or stolen. Why entrust an alibi to such a system, and why alert me to its existence?" Our friend is either desperate or supremely confident. I settled into my armchair, my notebook open to record the details of this strange encounter. But who is he, Holmes? I asked. A criminal seeking to taunt you, a victim seeking your aid. Holmes paused, his eyes glinting in the firelight. He is neither, Watson, or perhaps both. The note is a challenge, but also a plea. The phrase "a friend" is deliberately ambiguous, meant to intrigue while concealing identity. But the handwriting, the choice of Charing Cross, the urgency of the message, these are threads in a tapestry I shall soon unravel. He crossed to his desk and began scribbling telegrams, his pen moving with the precision of a fencer's blade. I have contacts at the Charing Cross post office, he said, not looking up. A clerk named Simmons owes me a debt from a matter involving a stolen dispatch case. He will examine the records of yesterday's post and report any packages or letters of note. In the meantime, Watson, I suggest you arm yourself with patience. This case will demand it. I nodded, though my mind was far from patient. The figure, the cryptic note, the grim setting of Whitechapel all pointed to a mystery that was both urgent and elusive. As Holmes continued his work, dispatching telegrams to his network of informants, I gazed into the fire, pondering the man who had set this puzzle in motion. Who was he, this shadowy friend? And what was the alibi he had mailed? A lifeline? Or a trap? The clock struck midnight, and Holmes finally set aside his pen, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "We shall have answers by morning," he said, sinking into his armchair. "Until then, Watson, rest. The game has begun, and we must be ready for its next move." I retired to my room, but sleep was a distant prospect. The events of the evening replayed in my mind: the fog, the crowded pub, the fleeting glimpse of the man in the muffler. I knew that Holmes, with his unparalleled intellect, would pursue this mystery to its end. But I could not shake the feeling that we were being watched, manipulated by a hand as deft as it was dangerous. The man who mailed his own alibi had thrown down a gauntlet, and Sherlock Holmes had picked it up. What lay ahead, I could not say, but I was certain it would test us both to our limits. As I drifted into an uneasy slumber, the words of the note echoed in my mind. "The alibi is in the post. Find it before it is too late." The fog of Whitechapel had followed us home, and with it the shadow of a truth yet to be revealed. Chapter 3. The Postman's Clue. The morning following our venture into Whitechapel dawned grey and cheerless, the fog of the previous night lingering like an unwelcome guest over the streets of London. In our rooms at 2-1B Baker Street, the atmosphere was no less charged, though the source was not the weather, but the restless energy of Sherlock Holmes. I found him already at his desk when I descended, surrounded by a litter of telegrams, newspaper clippings, and the ever-present haze of his shag tobacco. His dressing gown hung loosely about his lean frame, and his eyes, bright with purpose, betrayed a night spent in contemplation rather than sleep. "Good morning, Watson," he said without looking up, his pen scratching furiously across a sheet of notepaper. "I trust you slept well, though I wager your dreams were troubled by our mysterious friend." I settled into my chair, the memory of the crown, an anchor still vivid. "Slept well enough," I replied, "but I confess, Holmes, that note haunts me. An alibi in the post, what can it mean?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "It means, my dear Watson, that we are engaged in a game of shadows, where every clue is a move on a board we cannot yet see. But we are not without resources. He held up a telegram, its edges crumpled from his grip. This arrived an hour ago from Simmons, my contact at the Charing Cross post office. It confirms that a package was posted yesterday afternoon, addressed to a Mr. Edward Grayson, care of a boarding house in Stepney. The sender's identity is unrecorded, but the package was marked as urgent and bore the same crown and anchor, watermark as our letter. I leaned forward, my interest piqued. Edward Grayson, who is he? Holmes set down his pen and lit a fresh pipe, the flame casting sharp shadows across his angular features. Grayson is a man of dubious reputation, a gambler, a frequenter of low haunts, and, if my sources are correct, a suspected blackmailer. He was arrested 3 days ago for the murder of Sir Henry Balfour, a wealthy merchant found stabbed in his study in Belgravia. The case has caused a stir, for Balfour was a man of influence, and Grayson's guilt is widely assumed. I recalled the headlines from the previous week, though the details had escaped me amidst the demands of my practice. Balfour's murder, I said, nodding. The papers mentioned a rifled safe and a quarrel over debts. Grayson was seen near the house, was he not? Precisely, said Holmes, exhaling a plume of smoke. The evidence against him is circumstantial but compelling. A witness placed him at Balfour's door on the night of the murder, and a bloodied knife was found in his lodgings. Grayson claims he was elsewhere, a tavern in Mile End, but he has produced no witnesses to corroborate his story. His trial is set for tomorrow, and his conviction seems all but certain. I frowned, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align. Then this package, the alibi our friend mentioned, could be evidence to clear him. Holmes's eyes narrowed, or to condemn him further. The timing is too convenient, Watson. An alibi surfacing now, sent through the post and heralded by cryptic notes, suggests a design far beyond a simple act of charity. Our friend is no mere good Samaritan. He is a player in a deeper scheme. We must visit Stepney to learn more. I rose, reaching for my coat. Shall we go at once? Holmes held up a hand. Patience, Watson. The package has not yet reached the boarding house, according to Simmons. We shall wait for confirmation of its arrival, but in the meantime, I have other inquiries to pursue. He gestured to a stack of newspapers on the table. Balfour's murder has been much discussed, but the details are incomplete. I need fax names, dates, connections. While we await word from Stepney, I shall consult my index. He crossed to the shelves where his meticulously curated files resided, a vast repository of London's criminal and social undercurrents. I watched as he pulled down a heavy volume marked B and began leafing through it, his fingers moving with the precision of a pianist. I took up a newspaper, scanning the accounts of Balfour's death, but my thoughts kept returning to the note from the Crown and Anchor. The alibi is in the post. Find it before it is too late. The urgency of those words gnawed at me, and I wondered what manner of man could orchestrate such a mystery and why he had chosen Holmes as his audience. The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Holmes dispatched further telegrams, summoning information from his network of informants, those unseen allies who ranged from street Arabs to clerks in the city's bureaucratic heart. I busied myself with my medical correspondence, though my attention wandered, drawn to Holmes's restless pacing and muttered asides. By midday, a second telegram arrived, this one from the landlady of the Stepney boarding house, a Mrs. Carver. Holmes read it aloud, his voice tinged with satisfaction. The package has not yet arrived, but Mrs. Carver expects it by the afternoon. Post, he said. She describes Grayson as a solitary tenant, prone to late nights and secretive habits. No visitors, no letters, save for this package. Curious, is it not, that a man so guarded should receive such a missive? I nodded, my mind racing. Could Grayson himself be our friend? Perhaps he arranged for the package to be sent before his arrest. Holmes shook his head. Unlikely. Grayson is in custody, and the note's tone suggests an outsider with knowledge of his plight. No, Watson, our friend, is another someone with a stake in Grayson's fate, but not necessarily his salvation. We shall know more when we see the package. As we prepared to depart for Stepney, a boy arrived at our door, his cap askew and his face flushed from running. He thrust a crumpled note into Holmes's hand and darted off before we could question him. Holmes unfolded it, his brow furrowing as he read. The alibi is not what it seems. Trust no one. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. Another warning, I said. This affair grows murkier by the hour. Holmes tucked the note into his pocket, his expression unreadable. Indeed, Watson. Someone is watching us, anticipating our moves. But they have underestimated my methods. Come, we must make haste to Stepney. The journey to Stepney was a grim one, the fog giving way to a drizzle that slicked the cobbles and dulled the city's clamour. The boarding house, when we reached it, was a ramshackle structure, its facade crumbling and its windows dark with grime. Mrs. Carver, the landlady, greeted us with a wary eye, her apron stained and her manner brusque. She confirmed that Grayson had been a tenant for 6 months, paying his rent promptly but keeping to himself. Never a word to anyone, she said, leading us to his former room. And no letters till this package you're asking about. The room was sparse, its furnishings limited to a narrow bed, a rickety table, and a wardrobe that sagged under its own weight. Holmes examined the space with his usual thoroughness, his eyes darting from the floorboards to the ceiling, his fingers probing for hidden compartments. He found nothing of note, save for a faint scratch on the Tabbola series of numbers, barely legible, that might have been a code or a casual mark. He copied them into his notebook, his expression thoughtful. No package yet, Mrs. Carver said, hovering in the doorway. But the post comes at 3. I'll send word when it arrives. Holmes nodded, slipping her a shilling for her trouble. Do so promptly, Mrs. Carver. This matter is urgent. As we stepped into the street, the drizzle had thickened to a steady rain, and I pulled my coat tighter about me. What now, Holmes? I asked. Do we wait? He shook his head, his eyes scanning the street. We returned to Baker Street, but not to idle. I must cross-reference those numbers from Grayson's table with my index. They may be nothing or they may be the key to our friend's game. Back at our lodgings, Holmes plunged into his files, his concentration absolute. I took up my notebook, recording the day's events, but my thoughts were restless. The notes, the package, the shadowy figure in Whitechapel all pointed to a conspiracy that eluded my grasp. Holmes, I knew, saw connections where I saw only fragments. But even he seemed puzzled by the complexity of this affair. As evening fell, a final telegram arrived, confirming the package's delivery to Holmes read it with a gleam of triumph. Tomorrow, Watson, he said, we shall have the alibi in hand. But I warn, we expect the unexpected. Our friend is a master of deception, and we are only at the beginning of his design. I retired to my room, the weight of the day heavy upon me. The man who mailed his own alibi had drawn us into a labyrinth, and though Holmes was my guide, I could not shake the sense that danger lurked in its depths. As I drifted into sleep, the words of the latest note echoed in my mind. Trust no one. In the darkness of that rainy night, I felt the truth of those words more keenly than ever. Chapter 4. The boarding house. The rain that had begun as a drizzle the previous evening had settled into a steady downpour by the morning of our next venture, casting a pall over the streets of London and lending an air of grim determination to our mission. In the familiar confines of 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes was already at work when I descended, his lean figure bent over a map of the city, his fingers tracing the labyrinthine routes of Stepney with the precision of a cartographer. The fire burned low, and the room was filled with the acrid scent of his pipe, its smoke curling in lazy spirals toward the ceiling. "Good morning, Watson," he said, his voice brisk but distracted. "The package awaits us in Stepney, and with it, perhaps, the first true clue in this affair. We must be off at once." I nodded, reaching for my coat, my mind still tangled with the events of the previous day, the cryptic notes, the fleeting figure in Whitechapel, and the ominous warning to trust no one. "Do you expect trouble, Holmes?" I asked, checking the revolver in my pocket. His eyes gleamed with a familiar intensity. "Trouble, Watson, is the shadow that follows truth. I expect nothing less. But come, the game grows more intriguing by the hour." We set out through the sodden streets, the hansom's wheels splashing through puddles as we made our way to Stepney. The district, a warren of narrow lanes and crumbling tenements, seemed to huddle beneath the rain, its inhabitants darting from doorway to doorway like wary spectres. The boarding house, when we reached it, stood as a monument to neglect, its brick facade stained with soot and its windows clouded with years of grime. The sign above the door, barely legible, proclaimed it the Rose and Crown lodging house, though there was little of either flower or royalty in its dismal aspect. Mrs. Carver, the landlady, met us at the door, her apron as stained as ever and her expression one of guarded curiosity. "The package came with the morning post," she said, leading us into a narrow hall that smelled of damp and boiled cabbage. "It's in my parlour, as you asked. I ain't touched it, Mr. Holmes, though I don't mind saying it's queer business." All this, Holmes inclined his head, his manner courteous but impatient. "Your discretion is appreciated, Mrs. Carver. Pray show us to it." The parlour was a cramped room, its walls papered in a faded floral pattern that did little to brighten the gloom. On a small table sat the package, a small, tightly wrapped parcel, no larger than a cigar box, bound in brown paper and sealed with red wax. The address, written in the same hurried scrawl as the notes from Charing Cross and the Crown and Anchor. "Read, Mr. Edward Grayson, care of Rose and Crown Lodging House, Stepney." The postmark confirmed its origin at Charing Cross, and the Crown and Anchor watermark was faintly visible through the paper. Holmes examined it with the meticulous care of a jeweller inspecting a rare gem. He turned it over, his fingers probing the edges, his eyes noting every detail, the weight, the texture, the faint creases in the paper. "Singular," he murmured. "The knot is a sailor's hitch, yet the paper is of a quality rarely seen. In nautical circles, the wax is unadorned, suggesting haste or secrecy. Watson, your medical eye, what do you make of it?" I peered at the parcel, my training as a physician offering little insight into such matters. "It seems well sealed," I said cautiously. "The wrapping is tight, and there are no signs of tampering. But beyond that, I confess I see nothing remarkable." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You see, but you do not observe. The package is too light for its size, suggesting it contains paper rather than anything substantial. The ink of the address has a slight sheen, indicating a fresh quill and a hurried hand. This was prepared with care, but under pressure. He drew his penknife and, with a deft movement, slit the paper, revealing a single document within a folded sheet, yellowed at the edges. Bearing the seal of a tavern, he unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the contents. "A receipt," he said, holding it up to the light, "from the Red Lion Tavern in Mile End, dated the night of Sir Henry Balfour's murder. It bears Grayson's name and a sum for 2 pints of ale. If genuine, it places him at the tavern at the very hour Balfour was killed." I stared at the document, a simple slip of paper that seemed to carry the weight of a man's life. "An alibi," I said, just as the note promised, "but can it be trusted?" Holmes's expression was grim. "That, Watson, is the question. The receipt is convincing, too convincing, perhaps. The ink is fresh, the paper crisp, yet the date aligns perfectly with the crime. I smell a rat, but we must verify its authenticity. Mrs. Carver, has anyone inquired about this package?" The landlady shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "Not a soul, Mr. Holmes. But I'll tell you, plain Grayson wasn't the sort to get parcels. Kept to himself, he did, always slipping out at odd hours. I didn't trust him, nor his ways." Holmes nodded, tucking the receipt into his pocket. "Thank you, Mrs. Carver. We may return. Keep your eyes open for any strangers about the place." As we stepped back into the rain, I could not shake the sense that the package was a piece of a larger puzzle, its edges jagged and "What now, Holmes?" I asked, pulling my hat low against the wet. "Do we take this to Scotland Yard?" Holmes shook his head, his eyes scanning the street. "Not yet, Watson. The receipt is a lure, but its purpose is unclear. We must visit the Red Lion Tavern to confirm its provenance. If it is genuine, Grayson may indeed be innocent. If it is not, we are dealing with a forger of considerable skill and audacity." The journey to Mile End was a sodden affair, the rain drumming against the hansom's roof as we rattled through the city. The Red Lion was a bustling establishment, its interior a stark contrast to the grim streets outside. The air was thick, with the scent of ale and roasted meat, and the patrons a mix of labourers, clerks, and the occasional petty criminal filled the room with a lively clamour. Holmes, still in his tweed disguise, led me to a corner table, where we ordered drinks to deflect suspicion. The barkeep, a burly man named Jenkins, with a face scarred by years of rough living, approached us with a wary eye. Holmes, adopting the rough accent of an East End labourer, inquired about Grayson. "Heard he was a regular here," he said, sliding a coin across the counter. "Was he in on the night of the 15th, about 3 weeks back?" Jenkins pocketed the coin, his expression guarded. "Grayson? He's been in before, but I don't recall that night specific. Faces blur, you know, in a place like this. What's your interest in him?" Holmes leaned closer, his voice low. "Just settling a bet. A mate says he was here, not in Belgravia, when that toff got knifed. Got a receipt to prove it, he claims." Jenkins snorted, wiping a glass with a rag. "Receipt? We don't give out receipts unless asked, and even then, it's just a scribble. Grayson never asked for one, far as I know. You got it with you." Holmes produced the document, holding it just out of reach. This looked familiar. Jenkins squinted at it, his brow furrowing. "Looks like our mark, right enough, but I don't remember writing it. Could be one of the lads did it, Tom, or Will, maybe. Busy night, the 15th, Holmes nodded, his eyes sharp. Might we speak to Tom or Will? Jenkins shrugged. Tom's off today, and Will's in the back. I'll fetch him, but don't expect much. He's got a memory like a sieve. As Jenkins disappeared into the kitchen, Holmes leaned toward me, his voice a whisper. The receipt is genuine in form, Watson, but its origin is suspect. Jenkins's hesitation suggests he knows more than he admits or less. We must tread carefully. Will, a lanky youth with a nervous demeanor, emerged a moment later, wiping his hands on his apron. He glanced at the receipt, his eyes darting. To Jenkins, who stood nearby. Don't recall it, he said quickly. Could have been written, I suppose, but I don't know Grayson by sight. You'd have to ask Tom. Holmes thanked him, slipping another coin across the counter, and we left the tavern, the rain still falling in relentless sheets. What do you make of it, Holmes? I asked, as we climbed into a hansom. Receipt seems legitimate, yet neither man can confirm it. Holmes's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. It is legitimate, Watson, in the sense that it was written on Red Lion paper. But its timing is too perfect, its appearance too convenient. Someone has gone to great lengths to place this in Grayson's hands, and I suspect it is not to save him but to ensnare him further. We must return to Baker Street and await further developments. As we rattled through the wet streets, I felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The receipt, the notes, the elusive friend all pointed to a scheme as intricate as it was sinister. Holmes, I knew, was already unraveling its threads, but I could not shake the sense that we were being watched, our every move anticipated by a mind as cunning as his own. The man who mailed his own alibi had set a trap, and though Holmes was determined to spring it, I feared the cost might be higher than either of us could foresee. Back at Baker Street, Holmes resumed his pacing, the receipt laid out on the table. Like a piece of evidence in a trial. The game is afoot, Watson, he said, his voice low and intense, and our next move will take us deeper into its heart. Prepare yourself, for tomorrow may bring revelations or danger. I nodded, my revolver close at hand, and settled into my chair, ready to follow wherever this strange case led. Chapter 5. The case against Grayson. The rain had relented by the time Sherlock Holmes and I set out for Scotland Yard, but a damp chill hung over London, as though the city itself were reluctant to shed the gloom of the previous day. The morning of October 1895 was grey and heavy, the air thick with the scent of wet stone and coal smoke. In our rooms at 221B Baker Street, Holmes had been a whirlwind of activity since dawn, his mind fixed on the receipt from the Red Lion Tavern and the cryptic notes that had drawn us into this labyrinthian affair. The receipt, with its promise of an alibi for Edward Grayson, lay folded in his pocket, a tangible clue in a case that grew ever more elusive. As we rattled through the streets in a hansom, Holmes sat in silence, his sharp profile etched against the window, his eyes distant but alert. I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts, for his silence was not idleness but the prelude to insight. My own mind turned over the events of the past days, the shadowy figure in Whitechapel, the package in Stepney, the warnings to trust no one. Each piece seemed to fit into a larger pattern, yet the whole remained maddeningly out of reach. Scotland Yard, when we arrived, was a hive of activity, its corridors bustling with constables and clerks, their voices echoing off the stone walls. Inspector Lestrade greeted us in his office, a cramped room cluttered with files and the faint smell of ink. His ferret-like features, so familiar from our many collaborations, were set in a mixture of wariness and grudging respect as he rose to shake Holmes's hand. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, gesturing to a pair of chairs. "I wondered when you'd turn up. This Grayson business has the press in a frenzy, and the commissioner breathing down my neck. What's your interest in it?" Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "My interest, Lestrade, is in the truth a commodity often in short supply at Scotland Yard. I understand Edward Grayson stands accused of murdering Sir Henry Balfour. I wish to hear the details of the case from your own lips." Lestrade snorted, but there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. "The truth, is it? Well, it's plain enough. Balfour was found dead in his study 3 weeks ago, stabbed through the heart with a letter opener. His safe was rifled, papers scattered, and a few valuables missing. Grayson was seen leaving the house that night by a neighbor, reliable sort, a retired colonel. We found a bloodied knife in Grayson's lodgings, and he's got a history of debts and quarrels with Balfour over gambling losses. It's as tight a case as I've seen." I shifted in my chair, the weight of the evidence troubling. "And Grayson's defense?" I asked. Lestrade shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "He claims he was at the Red Lion Tavern in Mile End at the time of the murder around 10 o'clock. Says he was drinking with a mate, but he can't name the fellow, and no one at the tavern remembers him. Without corroboration, his story's worth less than the paper it's written on. The trial's tomorrow, and the noose is all but round." His neck, Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he drew the receipt from his pocket, placing it on Lestrade's desk with a deliberate movement. "And what of this, Lestrade?" A receipt from the Red Lion, dated the night of the murder, bearing Grayson's name. It was posted to his lodgings in Stepney yesterday, with a note suggesting it is his alibi. Lestrade's eyebrows shot up as he examined the document. "Posted, you say? That's a new one. Looks genuine, enough same mark as the Red Lion's. Receipts, but it's damned convenient, turning up now. You think it's a forgery?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I think, Lestrade, that convenience is the hallmark of deception. The receipt may be genuine in form, but its purpose is suspect. I have reason to believe it was sent not to exonerate Grayson, but to complicate his case or mine." Lestrade leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Your case? You've got a client in this, then? Who's pulling your strings, Holmes?" Holmes's expression remained inscrutable. "No client, Lestrade, but a correspondent, one who signs himself a friend and communicates through cryptic notes and the postal service. He has drawn my attention to Grayson's plight, and I intend to discover why." I watched Lestrade's face, expecting skepticism, but he merely nodded, accustomed to Holmes's methods. "Well, if anyone can unravel it, it's you, but I'll tell you straight, Holmes Grayson's guilty as sin. The evidence is ironclad. The knife, the witness, the motive. This receipt won't change that, not unless you find someone to swear Grayson was at that tavern." Holmes rose, retrieving the receipt with a swift motion. "Ironclad evidence, Lestrade, is often the most brittle. I shall call upon you tomorrow, after I have made further inquiries. In the meantime, I suggest you keep an eye on Solicitor. He may know more than he lets on." Lestrade frowned, but before he could respond, Holmes swept out of the office, and I followed, my mind racing. The hansom ride back to Baker Street was quiet, Holmes lost in thought, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on his knee. As we climbed the stairs to our rooms, I could no longer contain my curiosity. "What did you mean about Grayson's solicitor, Holmes?" I asked, hanging my coat by the door. "Do you suspect him of involvement?" Holmes lit a pipe and sank into his armchair, the firelight casting sharp angles across his face. "Percival Trent, Grayson's solicitor, withdrew from the case 2 days ago, citing irreconcilable differences. A curious move, Watson, for a man defending a client in so grave a matter. Trent is a reputable lawyer, known for handling sensitive cases, yet he abandons Grayson on the eve of trial. Why?" I settled into my chair, my notebook open. "Perhaps he believes Grayson is guilty." Holmes shook his head. "If he believed that, he would have withdrawn earlier." "No, Watson. Trent knows something that makes him fear for his own safety or reputation. Our friend's notes, the receipt, the timing of Trent's withdrawal, these are not coincidences. We must learn more about Trent, and quickly." He crossed to his desk, pulling out a file marked T from his index. "Trent has a history of representing men like Grayson, gamblers, blackmailers, those who skirt the edges of the law. He has a knack for securing acquittals, often through last-minute evidence or witnesses who materialize at opportune moments. This receipt fits his pattern, yet he is no longer in the game. That suggests a conflict or a threat." I frowned, the complexity of the affair growing clearer and yet more confounding. "Then what is our next step?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. "We await the next move from our friend, for I am certain he will not remain silent. In the meantime, I shall dispatch a telegram to my contacts in the legal quarter. Trent's office must be watched and his recent movements traced. And we must return to the Red Lion, for I am not satisfied with Jenkins's vagueness. There is a witness there, Watson, someone who saw Grayson, or saw the man who planted that receipt." As he spoke, a knock at the door announced Mrs. Hudson, bearing a telegram. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents. "From Mrs. Carver," he said, his voice low. "A man called at the boarding house this morning, inquiring about Grayson's package. He gave no name and left when pressed. Tall, muffled in a scarf, hat pulled, Lauer friend, I wager." I felt a chill, the image of the Whitechapel figure, vivid in my mind. "He's following us, Holmes. He knows we have the receipt." Holmes nodded, his expression grim. "And he fears what we may do with it. This is no ordinary adversary, Watson. He is bold, yet cautious, cunning, yet desperate. We must be ready for his next play." As evening fell, Holmes resumed his pacing, the receipt laid out on the table beside his chemical apparatus, as though he might distill its secrets through some alchemical process. I took up my notebook, recording the day's revelations, but my thoughts were uneasy. The case against Grayson was formidable, yet the receipt and the notes suggested a truth beyond the reach of Scotland Yard's blunt instruments. Holmes, I knew, was already piecing together the puzzle, but the shadow of our unseen friend loomed large, a spectre whose motives remained as obscure as the fog that shrouded London. "Tomorrow, Watson," Holmes said, pausing by the window, "we shall attend Grayson's trial. If the receipt is presented, it may shift the game in ways our friend did not anticipate. Prepare yourself, for the stakes are rising." I nodded, my revolver at the ready, and settled into my chair, bracing for the next turn in this intricate and perilous dance. Chapter 6. The package arrives the morning of Edward Grayson's trial, broke with a pale, watery sun that did little to dispel the chill that lingered in the air of London. The events of the past days, the cryptic notes, the shadowy figure in Whitechapel, the dubious receipt from the Red Lion Tavern, had woven a web of intrigue that seemed to tighten with each passing hour. In our rooms at 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes was already astir when I descended, his lean figure clad in a somber suit, his eyes alight with the fierce concentration that marked his pursuit of a mystery. The receipt, that enigmatic scrap of paper, purporting to be Grayson's alibi, lay upon the table, its edges worn from Holmes's repeated examination. "Good morning, Watson," he said, his voice crisp as he adjusted his cufflinks. "The package has reached Stepney, and with it, the next move in our friend's game. We must hasten to the boarding house before the trial begins. There is much to learn and little time." I nodded, reaching for my overcoat, my mind still grappling with the complexities of the case. "Do you believe the receipt will clear Grayson?" I asked, checking my revolver, a habit born of experience in Holmes's company. Holmes's lips twitched into a faint, sardonic smile. "Clear him, perhaps, if it were genuine. But I suspect it is a baited hook, Watson meant to draw us deeper into the net. Come, the hansom awaits." The journey to Stepney was a swift one, the streets less clogged than usual, as though the city itself sensed the urgency of our errand. The Rose and Crown lodging house loomed as grimly as before, its dilapidated facade slick with the remnants of yesterday's rain. Mrs. Carver, the landlady, met us at the door, her expression a blend of curiosity and suspicion, her apron crumpled, as though she had been wringing it in agitation. It came with the morning post. "Mr. Holmes," she said, leading us to her cramped parlour. "Just as you said. I've kept it safe, though I don't like the look of it. Too much queer business around Mr. Grayson, if you ask me." Holmes inclined his head, his manner courteous but impatient. "Your vigilance is commendable, Mrs. Carver. Pray show us the package." The parcel rested on the same small table where we had seen it before, its brown paper wrapping and red wax seal unchanged, save for a faint smudge on one corner, as though it had been handled carelessly. Holmes examined it with the precision of a watchmaker, his fingers tracing the knots, his eyes noting every detail. "The sailor's hitch remains," he murmured, "and the smudge is fresh printer's ink, perhaps, or coal dust. The package has travelled, but not far. Watson, your observations?" I peered at the parcel, my medical training offering little insight. "It appears undisturbed," I said. "The seal is intact, and the address is as we saw it. But what do you expect to find? The receipt is already in our possession." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The receipt was the bait, Watson. This package may hold the trapdoor, the truth. Let us see." With a flick of his penknife, he slit the paper, revealing a small wooden box within, its surface plain but sturdy. He lifted the lid, and inside lay a single item, a folded letter, its paper of the same fine quality as the original note from Charing Cross, bearing the crown and anchor watermark. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the contents with rapid intensity. "Most curious," he said, passing it to me. The letter was brief, written in the same hurried scrawl as our friend's previous missives. "Mr. Holmes, the receipt is but the shadow of the truth. Seek the man who served the ale. He knows more than he says." "A friend," I frowned, the words stirring a sense of unease. "Another riddle," I said. "The man who served the ale Jenkins, or one of his lads, At the Red Lion. Holmes nodded, his expression grim. Precisely. Our friend is directing us back to the tavern, but not to confirm the receipt's authenticity, to uncover a witness. This suggests the receipt itself is a diversion, meant to distract from a deeper truth. We must return to Mile End at once. I glanced at the clock on the parlour wall, its hands creeping toward 10. But the trial, Holmes Grayson's case, begins at noon. Should we not attend? Holmes shook his head, tucking the letter into his pocket. The trial will wait, Watson. The courtroom is a stage, and our friend is its director. If we are to understand his script, we must follow his cues. Mrs. Carver, has anyone else inquired about this package? The landlady's eyes narrowed. Not since that fellow yesterday, the tall one with the muffler. But I've had eyes on the place, as you asked. No one's come near. Holmes slipped her a coin, his voice low. Keep watching, Mrs. Carver, and if that man returns, send word to Baker Street immediately. We stepped into the street, where the sun had begun to burn through the morning mist, casting a pale light over the cobbles. The Red Lion Tavern was not far, and we made our way on foot, Holmes's stride purposeful, his mind clearly racing. I kept pace, my thoughts turning to the letter's cryptic directive. The man who served the ale Jenkins, Tom, or Will, held a key to the mystery. But whether as witness or conspirator, I could not say. The Red Lion was quieter than on our previous visit, its morning trade limited to a few early drinkers and a weary barmaid sweeping the floor. Jenkins, the barkeep, was behind the counter, polishing glasses with a rag that had seen better days. He looked up as we entered, his scarred face registering a flicker of recognition and suspicion. "Back again, are you?" he said, his tone guarded. "What's it now?" "More about Grayson." Holmes adopted his East End guise, his voice rough but friendly. "I, just tying up loose ends. That receipt you saw got us thinking. Who was working the bar that night, the 15th? You said it was busy, must have. Been Tom or Will poured the ale for Grayson, eh?" Jenkins's eyes narrowed, and he set down the glass with a deliberate thud. "I told you, I don't recall that. Night specific. Tom's off today, and Will's no good for details. You're chasing ghosts, mate." Holmes leaned closer, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "Ghosts, perhaps, but they leave footprints. Someone wrote that receipt, Jenkins. Someone who knew Grayson's name and the exact hour of Balfour's murder. If it wasn't you, or Tom, or Will, then who?" Jenkins shifted, his gaze darting to the barmaid who had paused in her sweeping look. "I run a tavern, not a diary. People come and go. If Grayson was here, I didn't see him. And if someone wrote him a receipt, it wasn't me." Holmes nodded, but his expression was unyielding. "Very well. Where might we find Tom? A word with him could settle this." Jenkins hesitated, then scribbled an address on a scrap of paper. "He's got a room in Bethnal Green. Don't know if he'll talk, but that's where he is." Holmes took the paper, slipping it into his pocket with a nod. "Obliged, Jenkins. We'll be in touch." As we left the tavern, I could sense Holmes's dissatisfaction. "He's hiding something," I said, glancing back at the Red Lions. Faded sign. His answers were too quick, too vague. Holmes's lips curved into a grim smile. "Indeed, Watson. Jenkins knows more than he admits, but he fears to speak. Whether from loyalty or threat, I cannot yet say. We must find Tomon, quickly." The address in Bethnal Green led us to a narrow tenement, its stairs creaking underfoot as we climbed to a small, cluttered room. Tom, a wiry man with a nervous tic, was home, his eyes widening at the sight of us. Holmes wasted no time, producing the receipt and the letter with a directness that brooked no evasion. "Tom," he said, his voice low but commanding, "this receipt was written at the Red Lion on the night of the 15th. Grayson's life hangs on it. Did you write it, or see who did?" Tom's hands trembled as he took the receipt, his eyes darting to the door. I don't know nothing about it," he stammered. "I was working, sure, but it was a mad night. Didn't see Grayson, didn't." "Write no receipt?" Holmes leaned closer, his gaze piercing. "You're lying, Tom. The letter says the man who served the ale knows more than he says. That's you, isn't it? Or is it Jenkins? Speak, man, or you'll answer to Scotland Yard." Tom paled, his tic worsening. "It wasn't me, I swear, but there was a fellow that night, not a regular. Came in late, asked for a receipt special like. Said it was for a bet. I wrote it, but he gave me Grayson's name. Paid me a shilling to keep quiet." Holmes's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Describe him, tall, muffled up, hat low. Didn't see his face clear, but he had a voice sharp, like a gent, but trying not to sound it. Left quick, through the back." Holmes exchanged a glance with me, and I knew we were thinking of the same figure, the man in the muffler from The Crown and Anchor. "Thank you, Tom," Holmes said, slipping him a coin. "Say nothing of this to anyone, not even Jenkins." As we descended the tenement stairs, I felt the puzzle tightening. "Our friend again," I said. "He's orchestrating this. Holmes planting the receipt, sending the notes. But why?" Holmes's expression was grim. "To control the narrative, Watson. The receipt is a forgery, designed to collapse under scrutiny, ensuring conviction. But the letter suggests a witness, someone who saw the real events of that night. We must find that witness before our friend silences him." We returned to Baker Street, the trial looming, and Holmes's mind a whirl of calculation. The package had arrived, but with it came not answers, but a deeper riddle. The man who mailed his own alibi was playing a dangerous game, and Holmes was determined to checkmate him. Chapter 7. The tavern's secret. The air in London on that October morning of 1895 was sharp with the tang of autumn. The streets still damp from the previous day's rain, but now bathed in a thin, pale sunlight that offered little warmth. In our rooms at 2-1B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes was a study in restless energy, his lean frame pacing before the fire. The receipt from the Red Lion Tavern and the latest note from our mysterious friend laid out on the table like pieces of a chessboard yet to be fully understood. The revelation from Tom, the nervous barman in Bethnal Green, had confirmed our suspicions. The receipt was a forgery, planted by a tall, muffled figure who seemed to haunt every turn of this case. Yet the note's directive to seek the man who served the ale suggested a deeper truth, one that Holmes was determined to uncover before Edward Grayson's trial reached its climax. "Watson," said Holmes, pausing to light a fresh pipe, "we are at a critical juncture. The receipt is a sham, but the note implies a witness, someone who saw more than they have admitted. We must return to the Red Lion Tavern, for its walls hold secrets yet to be pried loose." I nodded, reaching for my coat, my mind still reeling from the complexity of the affair. "But the trial, Holmes," I said, glancing at the clock, which showed 10:30. "It resumes at noon. Can we afford the time?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with a fierce intensity. "We cannot afford to ignore this lead, Watson. The trial will proceed, but the truth lies in Mile End. If we are to save Grayson or expose our friend's true design, we must act now. We set out at once, the hansom rattling through the bustling streets toward the Red Lion Tavern. The journey was swift, the city's morning rhythm lending an urgency to our mission. The tavern, when we arrived, was already stirring with early patrons, labourers taking a break from the docks, clerks snatching a quick pint before returning to their ledgers. The air inside was heavy with the scent of stale ale and wood smoke, and the low hum of conversation greeted us as we stepped through the door. Jenkins, the burly barkeep with the scarred face, was behind the counter, his expression darkening as he recognized us. "You again," he said, setting down a glass with a thud. "What's it now? I told you all I know about Grayson." Holmes, still in his rough tweed disguise, leaned against the counter, his voice low and conversational but laced with steel. "Not quite, Jenkins. We've spoken to Tom. He tells a different story, one involving a tall man, muffled up, who paid for a receipt in Grayson's name on the night of Balfour's murder. Care to amend your recollection?" Jenkins's eyes flickered with unease, his hands pausing in their work. "Tom's a fool, and his tongue's too loose. I don't know nothing about no receipt, and I didn't see no muffled man. You're barking up the wrong tree." Holmes's smile was cold. "Come, Jenkins, you're a man of the world. A shilling for a receipt is a tidy sum in a place like this. Someone saw something that night, and I wager it was you. Speak plain, or Scotland Yard will take an interest in your affairs." Jenkins's jaw tightened, and he glanced around the tavern, ensuring no one was within earshot. "All right," he muttered, leaning closer. "There was a fellow, maybe the one you mean. Came in late, near closing. Didn't drink, just asked for a receipt, said it was for a wager. Gave me Grayson's name and a shilling to write it up. I didn't think nothing of it, people do queer things for bets." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Describe him." Jenkins shrugged, his voice low. "Tall, like you said, scarf round his face, hat low. Spoke sharp, like a gent, but roughened his voice, like he didn't want to be marked. Left through the back, quick as you like." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, the description matching the figure from the Crown and Anchor. "And Grayson?" I asked. "Was he here that night?" Jenkins hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. "Can't say for sure. It was a busy night, faces all a blur. If he was, I didn't notice him special." Holmes's gaze was unyielding. "You're holding back, Jenkins. A man's life hangs in the balance. If you know more, now is the time to speak." Jenkins's shoulders slumped, and he wiped his hands on his apron, his voice barely above a whisper. "All right, damn you. There was another fellow that night, not Grayson, but someone watching the place. Sat in the corner, nursing a pint for hours. Didn't talk, just watched. When the muffled man came in, this other one perked up, like he was waiting for him. Left soon after." Holmes leaned forward, his voice soft but commanding. "Describe this watcher." "Middle height, dark coat, beard neat, like a clerk or a lawyer. Had a notebook, scribbling now and then. Didn't look like he belonged here, but he wasn't nervous, neither. Cool as you please." Holmes's eyes gleamed with triumph. "A notebook, you say? Most interesting. Did you see what he wrote?" Jenkins shook his head. "Not a chance. Kept it close, like it was private. But he was watching that muffled fellow, no mistake." Holmes slipped a coin across the counter, his manner suddenly brisk. "Thank you, Jenkins. Keep this to yourself, and if either man returns, send word to Baker Street." As we stepped into the street, the sun now higher but no warmer, I could sense Holmes's mind racing. "The Watcher, Holmes," I said. "Could he be our friend, or someone else entirely?" Holmes's expression was grim. "He is not our friend, Watson, but he is part of the game." A bearded man with a notebook, observing the a solicitor or an agent, possibly connected to Percival Trent. This affair is a tangle of motives, and we are only beginning to unravel it. I frowned, the complexity of the case pressing upon me. But why plant a forged receipt? If it's meant to clear Grayson, why not ensure it holds up? Holmes's eyes flickered with a dark amusement. "Because, Watson, it is not meant to clear him. The receipt is a trap, designed to collapse under scrutiny, ensuring Grayson's conviction. Our friend is not his ally, but his manipulator, orchestrating a narrative to serve his own ends. The Watcher, however, complicates matters. He may be an ally of our friend or his enemy." We hailed a hansom, the trial now imminent, but Holmes directed the driver not to the Old Bailey, but back to Baker Street. "We have no time to lose," he said, his voice low. "The Watcher's identity is our next clue. I must consult my index and dispatch telegrams to my contacts in the legal quarter. Trent's withdrawal from Grayson's case is no coincidence, and this bearded observer may hold the key." Back at our lodgings, Holmes plunged into his files, pulling out a volume marked legal and leafing through it with feverish intensity. I took up my notebook, recording Jenkins's account, but my thoughts were restless. The tavern had yielded a secret, but it was not the one we had expected. The muffled man, the forged receipt, the bearded watcher each, was a thread in a tapestry of deception, and I could not shake the sense that we were being led deeper into a maze. As Holmes scribbled telegrams, a knock at the door announced Mrs. Hudson bearing a letter. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents with rapid precision. "From one of my irregulars," he said, his voice taut. "A man matching the Watcher's description was seen leaving Trent's office yesterday, carrying a notebook and a sealed envelope. He boarded a cab for Spitalfields." I started, the pieces falling into place. Spitalfields. Could he be connected to our friend? Holmes nodded, his expression grim. "Possibly. Spitalfields is a warren, perfect for those who wish to vanish. We must trace this man before he slips away. But first, the trial. It begins in an hour, and we must be there to see how our friend's script unfolds." As we prepared to depart, Holmes tucked the receipt and the latest note into his pocket, his face set with determination. "The tavern has spoken, Watson," he said, "but its secret is only the beginning. Our friend is watching, and the bearded man is his shadow. We shall find them both, or my name is not Sherlock Holmes." I followed him into the street, my revolver at the ready, braced for the next turn in this perilous game. The man who mailed his own alibi had left another clue, but it was the Watcher in the tavern who now held my attention, a silent figure whose notebook might yet unlock the truth. Chapter 8. The second murder of the sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting a feeble light through the lingering haze of London as Sherlock Holmes and I hastened from Baker Street toward the Old Bailey. It was the day of Edward Grayson's trial, and the revelations at the Red Lion Tavern, the forged receipt, the muffled man, and the mysterious bearded watcher with his notebook had only deepened the enigma surrounding our elusive friend. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp bite of autumn, and the streets bustled with the usual clamour of hawkers, cabs, and pedestrians, Yet my mind was wholly occupied with the intricate web of this case, each thread pulling us toward an unseen center. Holmes, seated beside me in the hansom, was silent, his sharp features set in a mask of concentration, his fingers occasionally tapping the folded receipt in his pocket. I knew that Look's mind was a machine, sorting and analyzing the fragments of evidence with relentless precision. I, too, was preoccupied, the description of the bearded watcher haunting me. Who was he, this silent observer in the tavern? And what role did he play in the scheme orchestrated by our friend? We were nearing the Old Bailey when a sudden commotion disrupted our journey. A police constable, his face flushed with urgency, flagged down our hansom, forcing the driver to pull up sharply. "Mr. Holmes," the constable called, recognizing my companion. "Inspector Lestrade has sent for you urgent." "Sir, there's been another murder." Holmes's eyes flashed with interest, and he leaned out of the cab. "Where and who?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the street noise. "Percival Trent, Sir Grayson's solicitor. Found dead in his office not an hour ago, throat cut clean. Lestrade's there now, says you're to come at once." I felt a jolt of shock, the name striking like a thunderbolt. "Trent," I exclaimed, turning to Holmes. "But he withdrew from Grayson's case only days ago." Holmes's expression was grim, his eyes narrowing. "No coincidence, Watson. This is our friend's handiworker, a desperate countermove. To Trent's office, driver, and quickly." The hansom veered toward the legal quarter, the trial momentarily forgotten as we raced through the streets. Trent's office was in a quiet street near Lincoln's Inn, a respectable building with a polished brass plate bearing his name. As we alighted, a small crowd of onlookers had gathered, kept at bay by a pair of constables. Lestrade met us at the door, his ferret-like features pale and drawn, his usual air of confidence shaken. "Holmes, thank God you're here," he said, leading us inside. "This is a nasty business. Trent was found by his clerk not 2 hours ago, dead as a doornail. No sign of a struggle, but the place has been turned over, papers everywhere." We followed him up a narrow staircase to a well-appointed office, its walls lined with law books and its desk littered with documents. Percival Trent lay slumped in his chair, his head tilted back, a ghastly wound across his throat. The blood had pooled on the floor, staining the carpet a dark crimson. His eyes, wide and staring, seemed to hold a final moment of surprise, and his hands lay limp, one clutching a pen as though he had been writing when death overtook him. Holmes knelt beside the body, his eyes scanning every detail with clinical detachment. "A single cut, clean and deep," he murmured. "The work of a steady hand, likely a razor or a surgical blade. No defensive wounds, suggesting he knew his attacker, or was taken by surprise. Time of death, Watson." I examined the body, my medical training guiding my observations. "Less than 3 hours," I said, noting the rigidity and temperature. "Likely between 9 and 10 this morning." Holmes nodded, rising to inspect the desk. Papers were scattered, drawers pulled open, but the chaos seemed staged, as though the intruder had wished to suggest a robbery. Holmes's fingers darted over the desk, pausing at a torn envelope in the wastebasket. He retrieved it, his eyes narrowing as he examined the familiar Charing Cross postmark and Crown and Anchor watermark. "Another missive from our friend," he said, unfolding a single sheet within. The message, in the same hurried scrawl, was brief: "You know too much. Silence is your only safety." I felt a chill, the words echoing the earlier warning to trust no one. He was threatened, I said, and now he's dead. Do you think our friend is the killer? Holmes's lips tightened. Possibly Watson, but the timing is curious. Trent withdrew from Grayson's case, citing differences, yet he received this note. It suggests he uncovered something, dangerous something, tied to the receipt or Grayson's alibi. We must search this office thoroughly. Lestrade, hovering nearby, looked skeptical. You think this is connected to Grayson's case? Could be a disgruntled client. Trent had plenty of shady ones. Holmes's eyes gleamed. No, Lestrade. This is no random act. Trent's death is a move in the same gamer, desperate attempt to silence a man who knew too much. Look here. He pointed to a ledger, half hidden beneath a pile of papers. Its pages marked with cryptic notations, names, dates, and sums of money. This is no ordinary account book. These are records of transactions, likely illicit, involving Balfour and others. I peered at the ledger, the names unfamiliar, but the sums substantial. Blackmail, I ventured. Holmes nodded, or something akin to it. Balfour was wealthy, but his fortune was not entirely clean. Trent, as his solicitor, may have been complicit or, at least, aware. His withdrawal from Grayson's case suggests he feared exposure, and this note confirms it. Lestrade frowned, scratching his chin. So you're saying Trent was killed to keep him quiet? But who's behind it? Your friend? Holmes tucked the ledger under his arm, his expression grim. That, Lestrade, is what I intend to discover. I shall take this ledger for further study. In the meantime, question Trent's clerk closely. Every detail of his last days, his visitors, his mood, and post a man at the Red Lion Tavern. Our bearded watcher may yet reappear. We left the office, the ledger and the torn note in Holmes's possession, and stepped into the street, where the crowd had grown larger, drawn by the morbid curiosity that murder always provokes. The trial, now underway, loomed in my mind, but Holmes's focus was unshaken. We cannot attend the trial now, Watson, he said as we climbed into a hansom. Trent's death changes everything. Our friend is tightening the noose not just on Grayson, but on anyone who threatens his design. We must return to Baker Street and analyze this ledger. It may hold the key to the entire affair. Back at our lodgings, Holmes spread the ledger on the table, his eyes scanning the pages with feverish intensity. The entries were coded, but Holmes's knowledge of ciphers was unmatched, and within an hour he had begun to decipher the names. Balfour, he said, pointing to a recurring entry, and here Grayson, Trent, and others, all linked by payments. This is a record of a blackmail ring, Watson, with Balfour at its heart and Trent as its legal shield. Grayson was likely a victim, not a killer. I stared at the ledger, the pieces of the puzzle shifting. Then Grayson's Alibi receipt was planted to frame him. Holmes nodded, his voice low. Precisely. Our friend seeks to ensure Grayson's conviction, silencing him before he can expose the ring. Trent's death suggests he, too, became a liability. But the bearded watcher, his role is still unclear. Is he an ally of our friend or a rival? As evening fell, Holmes dispatched telegrams to his irregulars, tasking them with tracking the bearded man in Spitalfields. I took up my notebook, recording the day's grim discoveries, but my thoughts were heavy. Trent's murder had raised the stakes, and the shadow of our friend loomed larger than ever. The receipt, the notes, the ledger all pointed to a conspiracy that reached beyond Grayson's trial, into the dark underbelly of London's elite. "Tomorrow, Watson," Holmes said, lighting a pipe as he stared into the fire, "we shall pursue the Watcher. He is the link we need. But beware, a friend is desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." I nodded, my revolver close at hand, braced for the next move in this deadly game. The second murder had cast a new light on the man who mailed his own alibi, and I feared the truth would come at a terrible cost. Chapter 9. The Man in the Muffler. The murder of Percival Trent had cast a dark shadow over the case of Edward Grayson, transforming it from a puzzle of cryptic notes and forged receipts into a deadly game where lives were the stakes. The morning after our grim discovery at Trent's office, London lay under a pall of low clouds, the air heavy with the promise of more rain. In our rooms at 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes was a figure of relentless focus, his lean frame bent over the ledger we had taken from Trent's desk, its pages spread out like a map to a hidden truth. The fire burned steadily, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill that had settled in my bones. Born not of the weather, but of the sinister machinations we had uncovered, Holmes had scarcely slept, his eyes bright with the feverish intensity that marked his deepest immersion in a case. The ledger, with its coded entries of names and payments, had begun to yield its secrets under his scrutiny, revealing a blackmail ring that linked Sir Henry Balfour, Edward Grayson, and Percival Trent in a web of greed and deceit. Yet the figure of our mysterious friend, the man in the muffler who had sent the notes and orchestrated the forged receipt, remained elusive, as did the bearded watcher from the Red Lion Tavern, whose notebook might hold the key to the entire affair. "Watson," said Holmes, looking up from the ledger, "the game is tightening. Trent's death was no mere act of vengeance, it was a calculated move to silence a man who knew too much. Our friend is bold, but he is not infallible. The watcher in the tavern is our next lead, and I have reason to believe he is in Spitalfield." Set aside my morning tea, my mind still grappling with the previous day's revelations. "Spitalfields," I said, recalling the telegram from Holmes's irregulars. The bearded man was seen there, leaving Trent's office. "Do you think he's working with our friend?" Holmes's lips curved into a grim smile. "That, Watson, is what we must discover. He may be an ally, a rival, or a pawn in our friend's game, but his notebook suggests he is more than a casual observer. We must find him before our friend does." A knock at the door interrupted us, and Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a telegram. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents with rapid precision. "From Wiggins," he said, referring to the leader of his band of street urchins. "The bearded man has been traced to a lodging house in Spitalfields, rented under the name of John Smith, a common alias, but a promising lead. We must go at once." I reached for my coat, my revolver a reassuring weight in my pocket. "And the trial?" I asked, for Grayson's fate still hung in the balance. The forged receipt likely to be presented in court that very day. Holmes's expression was unyielding. "The trial will proceed without us for now. The courtroom is a distraction. Our friend's true stage is in the streets. If we can find the watcher, we may unmask the puppet master." The journey to Spitalfields was a descent into one of London's grimmest quarters, a maze of narrow alleys and sagging tenements where the air carried the mingled sense of poverty and desperation. The lodging house, a dilapidated structure, with a cracked sign proclaiming it the Star and Garter, stood at the end of a cobbled lane, its windows dark and uninviting. The landlady, A thin woman with a pinched face and eyes sharp with suspicion greeted us with reluctance. "John Smith," she said when Holmes inquired. "Aye, he's got a room upstairs, but he's out most days. Queer sort, keeps to himself. Paid a month in advance, though, so I don't ask questions." Holmes slipped her a coin, his voice smooth but commanding. "We need to see his room, madame. It is a matter of some urgency." The landlady hesitated, then led us up a creaking staircase to a small, sparsely furnished room. The air was stale, and the only signs of occupancy were a narrow bed, a rickety chair, and a small table bearing a single item, a postal receipt. Its edges crumpled, stamped with the Charing Cross postmark. Holmes seized it, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "The same hand," he said, comparing it to the notes from our friend. "This confirms it. Our bearded watcher is linked to the package sent to Grayson. But where is he?" I searched the room, my medical instincts guiding me to check for hidden compartments or overlooked clues. Beneath the bed, I found a small scrap of paper, half-torn, with a few scrawled words. "Meeting at the docks, midnight." I handed it to Holmes, who examined it with a frown. "The docks," he murmured. "A rendezvous, perhaps, or a trap. This watcher is no idle bystander. He is part of the game, and he is moving quickly." The landlady, hovering in the doorway, offered little more. "He comes and goes at odd hours," she said. "Saw him last night, heading out with a notebook under his arm. Didn't say where." Holmes thanked her, his mind already racing ahead. "We must return to Baker Street, Watson," he said as we descended the stairs. "I need to cross-reference this receipt with my records and dispatch my irregulars to the docks. The watcher is our link to our friend, and we must not lose him." Back at our lodgings, Holmes plunged into his files, pulling out a volume marked Spitalfields and leafing through it with feverish intensity. I took up my notebook, recording the morning's findings, but my thoughts were uneasy. The postal receipt, the scrap of paper, the bearded watcher, all pointed to a conspiracy that was both intricate and urgent. The trial, now underway, loomed in my mind, but Holmes's focus was unshaken. As he worked, a second telegram arrived, this one from Lestrade. Holmes read it aloud, his voice taut. "Grayson's defense has presented the receipt. Court in uproar. Judge demands verification. Where are you?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "As I suspected, the receipt is playing its part a poisoned gift, meant to collapse under scrutiny. But we are not yet ready for the courtroom, Watson. The docks at midnight, that is where the truth lies." I frowned, the complexity of the affair pressing upon me. "But who is this watcher, Holmes? A solicitor's clerk, a blackmailer's accomplice, or something else?" Holmes lit a pipe, the smoke curling around him like a veil. "He is a shadow, Watson, a man who sees but does not act, who records but does not speak. His notebook is the key, and I suspect it contains more than mere observations. If he is in Spitalfields and linked to the docks, he is either our friend's agent or his betrayer." As evening fell, Holmes dispatched his irregulars to watch the docks, tasking Wiggins with trailing any man matching the watcher's description. I prepared for the night ahead, my revolver at the ready, sensing that the rendezvous at midnight would be a turning point. The man in the muffler, our friend, had orchestrated this affair with chilling precision, but the bearded watcher was a wild card, his role unclear. "Tonight, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and intense, "we shall venture to the docks. Our friend is close, and the watcher is our path to him. Be prepared, for we may face danger." I nodded, the weight of the case heavy upon me. The man who mailed his own alibi had drawn us into a deadly dance, and the bearded watcher was its next step. As we left Baker Street, the city's lights dimmed by the gathering dusk, I felt the shadow of our friend looming ever closer, his motives as dark and elusive as the night itself. Chapter 10. The trial. The day of Edward Grayson's trial had arrived, and the weight of the unfolding mystery pressed heavily upon us as Sherlock Holmes and I prepared to leave Baker Street. The pale October sun of 1895 did little to lift the oppressive atmosphere that clung to London. Its light filtered through a haze that seemed to mirror the tangled web of deceit we had uncovered. The murder of Percival Trent, the forged receipt from the Red Lion Tavern, the cryptic notes from our elusive friend, and the bearded watcher in Spittlefield's all pointed to a conspiracy that reached beyond Grayson's fate, into the shadowed corners of the city's underbelly. Yet the trial, now in full swing at the Old Bailey, demanded our presence, for the receipt, the dubious alibi, was about to play its part in the courtroom drama. Holmes was unusually silent as we climbed into a hansom, his sharp features set in a mask of concentration, the ledger from Trent's office tucked under his arm. The scrap of paper found in the Spitalfields lodging house, with its reference to a midnight meeting at the docks, lay in his pocket, a clue he had not yet fully unraveled. I, too, was preoccupied, my mind turning over the bearded watcher's role and the chilling possibility that our friend was not only orchestrating Grayson's downfall, but eliminating anyone who threatened his scheme. "Holmes," I ventured, as the hansom rattled through the streets, "do you believe the receipt will be accepted in court? If it's a forgery, as you suspect, it could seal Grayson's fate." Holmes's eyes flickered with a grim amusement. "The receipt, Watson, is a poisoned chalice. Its presentation is precisely what our friend intends, a moment of false hope. That will crumble under scrutiny, ensuring Grayson's conviction. But the trial is not our true battleground. The docks tonight will reveal more than any courtroom could." I nodded, though the urgency of the trial gnawed at me. "And the watcher? If he's at the docks, will we confront him?" Holmes's lips tightened. "If he is there, Watson, we shall have him. But I suspect he is as much a pawn as Grayson, caught in our friend's game. We must be cautious, for the man in the muffler is watching, and he is dangerous." The Old Bailey loomed before us, its imposing facade a stark reminder of the stakes at hand. The courtroom was a hive of activity, its benches packed with spectators, reporters, and the curious, their murmurs rising like a tide as we slipped into seats. Near the back, Grayson stood in the dock, a gaunt figure with a defiant air, his eyes darting nervously as his new solicitor, young man named Harris, hastily appointed after Trent's death, prepared to present his defense. The prosecution, led by a stern barrister named Sir Charles Wentworth, had built a formidable case. Witnesses testified to Grayson's presence near Balfour's house on the night of the murder, the bloodied knife found in his lodgings, and his history of quarrels with the victim over gambling debts. The retired colonel who had seen Grayson leaving the scene was particularly damning, his testimony delivered with military precision. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the prosecution rested, confident in a swift conviction. Then Harris rose, clutching the receipt from the Red Lion Tavern, and a hush fell over the room. "My lord," he began, his voice steady but tinged with urgency, "I present new evidence and alibi that places my client, Edward Grayson, at the Red Lion Tavern in Mile End at the precise hour of Sir Henry Balfour's murder. This receipt, dated the 15th of October, bears his name and confirms his presence there. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, and the judge, a grizzled man with a reputation for skepticism, leaned forward, his spectacles glinting. "This is most irregular, Mr. Harris," he said. "The trial is well advanced, and this document appears conveniently timed. How did it come into your possession?" Harris hesitated, glancing at Grayson, who remained impassive. "It was delivered to my client's former lodgings in Stepney, my lord, and brought to my attention this morning. I submit it as proof of his innocence." Holmes, seated beside me, leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "Observe, Watson. The receipt is playing its part, but the judge's doubt is our friend's true aim. This is no defense, it is a trap." The judge called for the receipt to be examined, and a clerk carried it to the bench. The room was tense, the spectators leaning forward as the judge scrutinized the document. "This bears the mark of the Red Lion Tavern," he said, his tone measured, "but its authenticity must be verified. I will adjourn the court until tomorrow, pending inquiries. Mr. Harris, you will provide details of how this receipt was obtained." As the courtroom emptied, Holmes's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. "As I predicted, Watson, the receipt will not save Grayson, it will damn him. Our friend has ensured it will be questioned, and when it is found wanting, Grayson's last hope will collapse." We left the Old Bailey, the crowd's murmurs fading behind us as we stepped into the street. The trial had confirmed Holmes's suspicions, but it had also heightened the urgency of our pursuit. The docks at midnight loomed as the next stage in our friend's game, and the bearded watcher was our only lead. Back at Baker Street, Holmes plunged into preparations, dispatching telegrams to his irregulars with instructions to scout the docks and watch for a bearded man with a notebook. He spread the ledger on the table, its cryptic entries now partially decoded, revealing a network of payments linking Balfour, Trent, and several others, men of wealth and influence, entangled in a blackmail scheme. Grayson was their victim. Holmes said, pointing to an entry. "He paid to keep his secrets, but he threatened to expose them. That is why our friend seeks his conviction." I frowned, the pieces falling into place, but still incomplete. "And the watcher? Is he part of the ring, or an outsider?" Holmes lit a pipe, the smoke curling round him. "He is an observer, Watson, but not a neutral one. His notebook suggests. He is gathering evidence, perhaps for our friend, perhaps against him. The docks will tell us more." As evening fell, we prepared for the midnight rendezvous. Holmes donning a dark coat and scarf to blend with the dockside shadows, while I checked my revolver, its weight a grim reminder of the danger we faced. The docks were a perilous place at night, a labyrinth of warehouses and wharves where the Thamers's dark waters lapped against the stones, and I could not shake the sense that we were walking into a trap tonight. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and intense, "we shall see the face of our watcher, and perhaps our friend. Be ready, for the game is reaching its climax." We left Baker Street under a sky heavy with clouds, the city's lights dimmed by the encroaching night. The trial had been a spectacle, but the true drama lay ahead in the shadowed alleys of the docks, where the man who mailed his own alibi awaited Usor, so I feared. Chapter 11. The twist revealed the night was black and heavy as Sherlock Holmes and I made our way to the docks. The air thick with the briny Thames of the Thames and the distant clatter of cranes and chains. The events of Edward Grayson's trial, where the forged receipt from the Red Lion Tavern had sparked both hope and skepticism, lingered in my mind, But our focus now was the midnight rendezvous hinted at in the scrap of paper found in the Spitalfields lodging house. The bearded watcher, with his mysterious notebook, was our quarry, and Holmes was convinced that he held the key to unmasking our elusive friend. The man in the muffler who had orchestrated this intricate conspiracy. Holmes, clad in a dark coat and scarf that rendered him a shadow among shadows, moved with the silent grace of a predator, his eyes scanning the darkened wharves. I followed close behind, my revolver a reassuring weight in my pocket, my senses sharpened by the knowledge that danger lurked in the fog-shrouded alleys of the docks. The Thames lapped against the pilings, its rhythm a low, ominous pulse, and the occasional cry of a gull pierced the stillness, heightening the tension that gripped me. We had reached a cluster of warehouses near Wapping when Holmes paused, his hand raised for silence. A faint scuffle echoed from a nearby alley, followed by the low murmur of voices. He gestured for me to follow, and we crept forward, keeping to the shadows. At the mouth of the alley, we saw two figures, one tall, muffled in a scarf, and had the unmistakable silhouette of our friend, and the other, a bearded man, clutching a notebook, his posture tense but defiant. Holmes's eyes gleamed with triumph, but he held me back, his voice a whisper. "Observe, Watson, we are about to witness the heart of the game." The muffled man spoke, his voice low and sharp, carrying a trace of a gentleman's accent beneath its roughened edge. "You've meddled too far, Carver. That notebook is mine, and you'll hand it over, or join Trent in the hereafter." The bearded man, Carver, as he was called, stood his ground, his voice steady despite the threat. "You'll not have it, Trent. I know what you've done, Balfour, Grayson, the forged receipt. The ledger's safe, and Holmes is on to you. You're finished." I started, the name striking like a thunderbolt. "Trent," I whispered, my hand tightening on my revolver. But Trent is dead. Holmes's grip on my arm was firm, his voice barely audible. "Not dead, Watson, a ruse. Listen." The muffled man, Percival Trent, alive and unmasked, claffed. A cold, mirthless sound. "Holmes is a bloodhound, but he's chasing shadows. The receipt will hang Grayson, and your notebook won't change that. Hand it over, or I'll take it from your corpse." Carver raised his notebook, his voice defiant. "This name's you, Trent. Your deals with Balfour, your blackmail, your murder. I was his clerk, not his fool. I saw it all, and I'll see you swing for it." Trent lunged, a blade glinting in the dim light, but Carver was quick, dodging and landing a blow that sent Trent staggering. Holmes sprang forward, his voice ringing out, "Enough, Trent. The game is up." Trent whirled, his face pale but defiant. Beneath the muffler, "Holmes," he spat, his blade raised. "You're too late. Grayson's done for, and this fool's next." I drew my revolver, leveling it at Trent. "Drop the knife, or I fire," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. Trent hesitated, his eyes darting between us, then flung the knife aside and bolted down the alley. Holmes was after him in an instant, his long legs closing the distance as I followed, my revolver still drawn. Carver, clutching his notebook, staggered to his feet, shouting, "He's headed for the river." The chase was brief but fierce. Trent weaving through the maze of crates and barrels, his breath ragged in the cold air. Holmes, relentless, tackled him near the water's edge, pinning him to the ground. "Your scheme ends here, Trent," he said, his voice cold as steel. "The ledger, the receipt, the note's all you're doing." Trent struggled, his face contorted with rage. "You've nothing, Holmes. Grayson's guilty, and the receipt proves it." Holmes's smile was grim. "The receipt proves your desperation, Trent. It's a forgery, planted to ensure Grayson's conviction. You killed Balfour to protect your blackmail ring, and you staged your own death to escape suspicion. But you underestimated Carver and me." Carver approached, his notebook open, revealing pages of meticulous note states, names, payments, all documenting Trent's crimes. "I was Balfour's clerk," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. "I saw the ledger, saw Trent's deals. When he killed Balfour, I knew Grayson was a scapegoat. I followed him, gathered proof." Holmes nodded, binding Trent's wrists with a length of cord from his pocket. "And you, Carver, were the watcher in the tavern. Your notebook is the true alibi, not Grayson's, but yours, exposing Trent's guilt." I lowered my revolver, the pieces falling into place. "Then, Grayson is innocent?" I asked. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Innocent of Balfour's murder, but not blameless. He was a victim of the blackmail ring, driven to desperation. Trent framed him, forging the receipt to collapse under scrutiny, ensuring his conviction. The notes to me were a taunt, meant to draw me into the game while obscuring his tracks." Trent snarled, his composure cracking. "You'll never prove it, Holmes. The ledger's coded, the receipts dismissed. You've nothing but a clerk's word." Holmes's smile was cold. "The ledger is decoded. Trent and Carver's testimony will carry weight. Your mistake was underestimating the man who mailed his own alibi at Grayson. But you, sending the receipt to trap him." We escorted Trent to a nearby police station, where Lestrade, summoned by one of Holmes's irregulars, took him into custody. Carver handed over his notebook, its pages a damning record of Trent's crimes. As we left the station, the first light of dawn broke over the Thames, casting a pale glow on the water. "Holmes," I said, as we walked back to Baker Street, the twist Trent alive, staging his own death. "How did you suspect it?" Holmes lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the morning air. "The ledger, Watson. Its entries continued after Trent's supposed death, suggesting he was still active. The notes, the receipt, the timing all pointed to a mind orchestrating from the shadows. Trent's murder was too convenient, a ploy to vanish while Grayson took the fall." I nodded, marveling at his insight. "And Carver, he risked his life to expose Trent." Holmes's expression softened. "A rare man, Watson, one who saw the truth and dared to act. His notebook is Grayson's true alibi, and it will free him." As we reached Baker Street, the city awakening around us, I felt the weight of the case lift, though the shadow of our friend now unmasked as Trent lingered. The trial would conclude with Grayson's acquittal, thanks to Carver's evidence, but the cost had been high. The man who mailed his own alibi had played a deadly game, but Sherlock Holmes had checkmated him at last. Chapter 12. The confrontation, the dawn that broke over London on that October morning of 1895, was a tentative one, its pale light struggling through the ever-present haze, as though reluctant to illuminate the grim truths we had uncovered. The capture of Percival Trent at the docks, unmasked as the orchestrator of a deadly scheme to frame Edward Grayson for Sir Henry Balfour's murder, had brought us to the precipice of resolution, yet the air in our rooms at 221B Baker Street was charged with the tension of unfinished business. Sherlock Holmes, seated by the fire, his lean frame draped in his dressing gown, was poring over the notebook provided by Carver, the bearded watcher who had proven to be the linchpin in exposing Trent's blackmail ring. The ledger from Trent's office lay open beside it, its decoded entries a map of greed and treachery that had cost lives and reputations. I, Dr. John Watson, sat opposite, my notebook open to record the events of the previous night's confrontation. Though my mind was still reeling from the revelation that Trent, presumed dead, had been our elusive friend all along. The forged receipt, the cryptic notes, the staged murder-all were pieces of a puzzle designed to ensure Grayson's conviction while Trent vanished into the shadows. Carver's courage and Holmes's relentless pursuit had thwarted that plan, but the final act of this drama awaited us at the Old Bailey, where Grayson's trial was set to resume. Holmes looked up from the notebook, his eyes gleaming with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had unraveled a knot. "Watson," he said, his voice low but vibrant, "today we shall see justice done, not only for Grayson but for Balfour, whose murder was but a stepping stone in Trent's ambition." Carver's notebook is a masterpiece of evidence dates, names, transactions, all corroborating the ledger. Trent's confession last night, though coerced, will seal his fate. I nodded, setting down my pen. "But will it be enough, Holmes? Trent is a solicitor, cunning and well-connected. He may yet wriggle free." Holmes's lips curved into a grim smile. "He may try, Watson, but the noose is tightening." The notebook names not only Trent but others in the blackmail ringmen of influence who will not risk exposure by defending him. And Carver, though a humble clerk, is a credible witness. His testimony, combined with the ledger, will be unassailable. "Knock at the door," announced Mrs. Hudson, bearing a telegram from Inspector Lestrade. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents with rapid precision. "Grayson's trial resumes at 10, he said, rising with a sudden energy. "Lestrade has Trent in custody and is preparing to present Carver's evidence. We must be there, Watson, to ensure our friend's final act is played out." I reached for my coat, my revolver still at hand, for though Trent was in chains, I could not shake the sense that his influence lingered. "And Carver," I asked, "will he testify?" Holmes nodded, tucking the notebook and ledger under his arm. "He is under Lestrade's protection, and his resolve is firm. Come, the Old Bailey awaits." The journey to the courtroom was swift, the streets bustling with the morning's commerce, though the weight of the case dulled the city's vibrancy. The Old Bailey was a fortress of justice, its halls thronged with reporters, spectators, and the curious, all drawn by the sensational turn in Grayson's trial. We slipped into seats near the front, where we could observe the proceedings with clarity. Grayson stood in the dock, his gaunt features etched with a mixture of hope and defiance. His new solicitor, Harris, beside him, clutching a sheaf of papers that now included Carver's notebook. The judge, his spectacles glinting in the gaslight, called the court to order, his voice stern as he addressed the defense. "Mr. Harris, the court adjourned yesterday to verify the authenticity of the receipt from the Red Lion Tavern. Have you further evidence to present?" Harris rose, his manner confident but respectful. "My lord, new evidence has come to light that not only exonerates my client, but exposes a conspiracy to frame him for Sir Henry Balfour's murder. I call Mr. James Carver, a former clerk to the late Percival Trent, to testify." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as Carver entered, his bearded face pale but resolute, his notebook clutched in his hand. Under oath, he recounted his role as Balfour's clerk, his discovery of the blackmail ring, and his observation of Trent's machinations. He described the night at the Red Lion, where he had seen Trent disguised as the muffled man, procured the forged receipt, and his subsequent efforts to document the truth in his notebook. Holmes leaned toward me, his voice a whisper. "Observe. Watson Carver's testimony is the keystone. Trent's scheme depended on silence, but Carver has broken it. The prosecution, led by Sir Charles Wentworth, cross-examined Carver with vigor, probing for inconsistencies, but the clerk's account was unshakable, supported by the ledger's damning entries. When Lestrade took the stand, producing Trent in custody, the courtroom erupted in gasps. Trent, his composure frayed but his defiance intact, glared at Holmes as he was led in, his wrists bound. "Mr. Trent," the judge said, his tone icy, "you stand accused of orchestrating a forgery and committing the murder of Sir Henry Balfour. What say you?" Trent's voice was cold, his eyes darting to Holmes. "I am a victim of circumstance, my lord. These accusations are baseless, the work of a vengeful clerk and a meddling detective." Holmes rose, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "If I may, my lord, the evidence speaks otherwise. The ledger, decoded by my methods, details a blackmail ring led by Trent and Balfour, with Grayson as their victim. The receipt was forged to frame him, and Trent staged his own death to escape justice. Mr. Carver's notebook corroborates every detail." The judge examined the ledger and notebook, his brow furrowed as he read. After a tense deliberation, he turned to the jury. "You have heard the evidence. The receipt is deemed a forgery, and new testimony implicates Mr. Trent in a conspiracy to pervert justice. You will consider this in your verdict." As the jury retired, Holmes and I stepped. Outside, the air sharp with the scent of impending rain. "It's over, isn't it, Holmes?" I said, my relief tempered by exhaustion. "Grayson will be acquitted, and Trent will face justice." Holmes's eyes were distant, scanning the crowd. "For Grayson, yes, Watson. But Trent's connections run deep. There are others in that ledger, men who will not take kindly to exposure. We must remain vigilant." We returned to Baker Street, the trial's outcome all but certain, yet Holmes's words lingered. The confrontation at the docks had unmasked Trent, but the ledger hinted at a broader network, its shadows still lurking. As I took up my notebook to record the day's events, I marveled at Holmes's genius in unraveling the twist Trent's faked death. His role as the man in the muffler, his desperate bid to control the narrative. The man who mailed his own alibi had been defeated, but the cost had been high, and the echoes of his scheme would not soon fade. Chapter 13. The net closes the resolution of Edward Grayson's trial, with Percival Trent unmasked as the orchestrator of a sinister plot to frame him for Sir Henry Balfour's murder, had brought a measure of clarity to the tangled web we had been navigating. Yet, as Sherlock Holmes and I returned to 221B Baker Street on that October afternoon of 1895, the air in our lodgings was far from celebratory. The fire burned steadily in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the cluttered room, but Holmes's restless energy filled the space with a palpable tension. The ledger from Trent's office and James Carver's notebook lay upon the table, their pages a testament to the blackmail ring that had claimed lives and reputations. But Holmes's sharp features were set in a frown, his mind clearly fixed on the shadows that still lingered. "Watson," he said, pacing before the fire, his pipe trailing a thin veil of smoke, "the net has closed around Trent, but the game is not yet over. The ledger names others, men of wealth and influence who profited from Balfour's schemes. They will not sit idly by while their secrets are exposed." I settled into my armchair, my notebook open to record the day's events. though my thoughts were heavy with the weight of the case. Grayson is free, at least, I said, seeking some measure of resolution. Carver's testimony and the ledger ensured that. Trent will face justice for Balfour's murder and his own deception. Holmes's eyes gleamed with a grim intensity. Free, yes, but not unscathed. Grayson was a victim of the blackmail ring, but his own indiscretions made him vulnerable. As for Trent, his conviction is certain, but his allies remain at large. We must tread carefully, for they will seek to protect themselves. I nodded, recalling the names in the ledger. Figures in finance, law, and even government, their payments to Balfour and Trent, a silent pact of mutual corruption. Do you think they'll come after Carver? I asked, my hand straying to the revolver in my pocket. Holmes paused, his gaze fixed on the fire. Carver is a threat to them, as is the ledger. Lestrade has him under protection, but our adversaries are cunning. We must ensure that evidence reaches the proper handsman I trust at Scotland Yard, not prone to influence. A knock at the door interrupted us, and Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a telegram. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents with rapid precision. From Lestrade, he said, his voice taut. The jury has returned. A verdict: Grayson is acquitted, and Trent is charged with Balfour's murder and conspiracy to pervert justice. The ledger and Carver's notebook have been admitted as evidence, and a broader investigation into the blackmail ring is underway. I exhaled, a wave of relief washing over me. Then it's truly over, Holmes. Trent's scheme has collapsed. Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile, but his eyes remained wary. Over for Grayson, perhaps, but the ripples of this affair will spread. The men named in the ledger will not take kindly to scrutiny. I have already dispatched telegrams to my contacts in the Home Office, urging a swift and discreet inquiry. But we must act to protect Carver and ourselves. I frowned, the weight of his words settling upon me. You expect retaliation? Holmes nodded, sinking into his chair and lighting a fresh pipe. Men of power do not surrender their secrets lightly, Watson. Trent was their instrument, but he was not alone. The notes, the forged receipt, the staged Ethel, were too elaborate for one man's design. There is another hand at work, one we have not yet seen. I stared at him, the possibility chilling me. Another hand? You mean someone above? Trent. Holmes's eyes narrowed, the smoke curling around him like a shroud. Precisely. The ledger hints at a figure, a silent partner, perhaps, who funded Balfour's schemes and pulled Trent's strings. The notes signed a friend were too theatrical, too calculated, to be Trent's alone. Our true adversary remains in the shadows, and I suspect he is watching us still. I felt a chill, the memory of the cryptic warnings, trust no one. The alibi is not what it seems, taking on a new menace. What do we do, Holmes? I asked, my voice steady despite the unease that gripped me. Holmes rose, crossing to his desk and pulling out a map of London's East End. We begin by securing Carver's safety. He is the key witness, and his notebook is our strongest weapon. I have arranged for him to be moved to a safe house under the protection of Inspector Gregson, one of the few at Scotland Yard I trust implicitly. As for the ledger, I shall make copies and distribute them to men beyond the reach of influence. He paused, his fingers tracing the map's lines, his mind clearly racing. Tonight, Watson, we shall revisit the lodging house where we found the watcher's receipt may yet hold clues. Our unseen adversary may have left Trace's correspondence, payments, anything to point us to his identity. I reached for my coat, my revolver a familiar weight, and if we find him, Holmes's smile was cold. If we find him, Watson, we shall bring him into the light, but be prepared he will not come willingly. The journey to Spitalfields was a descent into the city's grim heart, the streets narrowing into a labyrinth of shadowed alleys and crumbling tenements. The Star and Garter lodging house stood as forlorn as before, its cracked sign swaying. In the evening breeze, the landlady, her pinched face wary, recognized us at once. "Back again," she said, her voice sharp. "Your Mr. Smith hasn't returned since yesterday. Room's empty, but you're welcome to look." We ascended the creaking stairs to the small, sparse room, its air heavy with the scent of damp and neglect. Holmes examined the space with his usual thoroughness, his eyes darting from the floorboards to the walls, his fingers probing for hidden compartments. Beneath the rickety table, he found a faint marker smudge of ink, barely visible, in the shape of a monogram, RV. "Interesting," Holmes murmured, copying it into his notebook. "A careless slip, perhaps, or a deliberate taunt. This monogram may be our link to the silent partner." I searched the bed and wardrobe, finding nothing but dust and a single button, its design plain but finely crafted, suggesting a wearer of means. Holmes examined it, his eyes narrowing. "Not the sort of button one finds in Spitalfields," he said. "This belongs to a gentleman or someone posing as one." We left the lodging house. The evening had deepened into night, the gaslights casting feeble pools of light. Holmes dispatched a telegram to Wiggins, his chief irregular, instructing him to watch for any man matching the description of a gentleman with the initials RV. I felt the net closing, but the shadow of our unseen adversary loomed large, his presence a silent threat in the city's undercurrents. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the ledger and notebook on the table, his mind a whirl of calculation. "The net closes, Watson," he said, his voice low and intense. "Trent is in custody, Grayson is free, and Carver is safe for now. But the true architect of this scheme remains at large, and we must find him before he strikes again." Nodded, my revolver at the ready, braced for the final act in this deadly drama. The man who mailed his own alibi had been unmasked, but the mastermind behind him was still out there, and I knew Holmes would not rest until the net had closed. Around him, too. Chapter 14. A final reflection. The resolution of Edward Grayson's trial and the unmasking of Percival. Trent, as the architect of a deadly conspiracy, had brought a semblance of closure to one of the most intricate cases Sherlock Holmes and I had ever faced. Yet, as the pale light of an October evening in 1895 filtered through the windows of 221B Baker Street, a quiet unease lingered in our lodgings. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cluttered room, where the ledger from Trent's office and James Carver's notebook rested on the table, silent witnesses to the web of blackmail and murder we had unraveled. Holmes, seated in his armchair, his pipe sending curls of smoke toward the ceiling, was lost in thought, his sharp features softened by a rare moment of introspection. I, Dr. John Watson, sat opposite, my notebook open to record the final chapter of this extraordinary affair, though my mind was heavy with the weight of its cost. The acquittal of Grayson, the conviction of Trent, and the courage of Carver had righted a grave injustice, but the ledger's cryptic entries and the faint monogram RV, found in the Spitalfields lodging house, hinted at a deeper silent partner who had yet to be brought to light. "Holmes," I ventured, breaking the silence, "the case is closed, is it not? Grayson is free, Trent is in custody, and the blackmail ring is exposed. Yet you seem troubled. Holmes's eyes, half closed, flickered with a faint amusement. Closed, Watson. In one sense, yes. Justice has been served, and the machinery of the law will grind on. But you know as well as I that truth is a restless quarry. The ledger names men still at large, men who will guard their secrets with as much ruthlessness as Trent. And this RV, he is the spectre at the feast, the hand that guided Trent's pen. I nodded, recalling the button and the monogram, those fleeting clues to a figure who had eluded us. Do you believe we'll find him? I asked, my hand straying to the revolver I still kept close. A habit born of this case's dangers. Holmes leaned forward, tapping the ash from his pipe. Into the fire. We shall, Watson, in time. My irregulars are watching the docks and the legal quarter, and I have alerted my contacts at the Home Office. The monogram is a thread, and threads lead to tapestries, but for now, we must let the quarry rest. Men, like RV, are patient, and so must we be. I closed my notebook, the weight of his words settling upon me. The case of the man who mailed his own alibi had begun with a single envelope, its hurried scrawl and cryptic message drawing us into a labyrinth of deception. The journey had taken us from the smoky depths of Whitechapel to the grim alleys of Spitalfields, from the bustling chaos of the Red Lion Tavern to the solemnity of the Old Bailey. Each step had revealed a new layer of treachery. Trent's forged receipt, his staged death, his role as the man in the muffler, and the blackmail ring that had ensnared Balfour, Grayson, and others in its coils. Holmes, I said, my voice low, this case has been unlike any other. The notes, the receipt, the ledger was as though our friend played a game with us, taunting you with riddles. Holmes's lips curved into a wry smile. He did, Watson, and he played it well. Trent was a master of misdirection, using the postal service as his stage, the receipt as his prop, and Grayson as his scapegoat. But he underestimated two things: Carver's resolve and my own tenacity. Every riddle has a solution, and every game a checkmate. I thought of Carver, the bearded clerk whose notebook had turned the tide, his quiet courage a counterpoint to Trent's cunning. Carver was the true hero, I said. Without him, Grayson would have hanged. Holmes nodded, his expression softening. A rare man. Watson, one who saw injustice and acted at great risk to himself. His notebook was the true alibi, not for Grayson, but for the truth itself. He is safe now, under Gregson's watch, but he will need to remain vigilant. The men in the ledger will not forget him. I glanced at the table where the ledger lay, its pages a catalogue of corruption. And what of those men? Will they face justice? Holmes's eyes hardened. Some will, in time. The Home Office has the ledger's copies, and investigations are underway. But men of wealth and power are slippery, Watson. They have resources, Trent lacked resources, that may shield them for years. Yet I shall not rest until RV is found. He is the key, the silent partner who funded Balfour's schemes and set this tragedy in motion. The fire crackled, and I felt a pang of admiration for my friend's unrelenting pursuit of truth. The case had tested us both, Holmes's intellect and my own endurance, but it had also revealed the depth of his commitment to justice. A beacon in the fog of London's darker corners. Holmes, I said, this affair began with a letter. A simple envelope that drew us into a world of shadows. Do you ever wonder why Trent chose you? Why send those notes to Baker Street? Holmes leaned back, his pipe glowing faintly in the dim light. He chose me, Watson, because he knew I would follow. Men like Trent thrive on control, on bending others to their will. The notes were a challenge, a taunt to draw me into his game. He believed he could outwit me, but he forgot the first rule of any contest: know your opponent. I smiled, the memory of Trent's capture at the docks vivid. In my mind, you proved him wrong, Holmes. The man who melded his own alibi thought himself a puppet master, but you cut his strings. Holmes's eyes twinkled with a rare warmth. With your help, Watson, your steadiness, your courage, they anchor me when the game grows dark. This case was no exception. I felt a flush of pride, tempered by the humility his words inspired. The case had been a journey through deception and danger, but it had also been a testament to our partnership, a bond forged in the crucible of countless adventures. As night fell, Holmes rose, crossing to the window to gaze out at the gaslit street below. "The net has closed around Trent," he said, his voice low, "but the greater net remains open. RV is out there, Watson, and others like him. We shall meet them again in some shadowed corner of this city. Until then, we wait." I closed my notebook, the final words of this chronicle written, though I knew the story was not truly ended. The man who mailed his own alibi had been defeated, but the echoes of his scheme lingered, a reminder of the fragility of truth in a world of secrets. As I prepared for bed, the fire dying to embers, I felt a quiet resolve. Whatever lay ahead, I would stand by Holmes's side, ready to face the shadows once more. The end.